Brilliant. Thank you for joining us tonight, this evening, on How We Fix Britain. Oh, hang on. Turn the one thing on. Hello and welcome to How We Fix Britain. And I'm joined tonight by Zoe Gardner, who is a researcher and independent journalist specialising in immigration and asylum policies. So good to have you on the show, Zoe. And also, if you'd like to join the chat, please subscribe or have already subscribed. And you can join the chat on that. But in How We Fix Britain, it's an ongoing series in which we get experts in the field to talk about things we could do to make Britain a much better place for us to live in and everyone to live in, and to make the world a better place in general. So straight in with the first question here, Zoe. What do you see as the biggest flaws in the UK's current system of asylum and refugee policies? And how do these impact refugees? Is that a real thing? Refugees' chances of reaching safety?
Well, hi everybody, and thanks so much for having me on to talk about this. Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's a big question. There's a lot of problems with our system. Like it's a very bad system. I would say that the fundamental problem in terms of protecting refugees is that you have to be on British soil in order to submit a claim for asylum. And there are no safe ways dedicated for asylum seekers to come to the UK and to get to UK soil. And that creates the whole big problem that we hear about every single day, of people taking irregular means to reach this country, who mean to seek asylum here. And
Yeah.
essentially, that's the big catch-22 of the whole system. And when we put in place rights in 1951, when the Refugee Convention was drawn up, it was recognized as a right just not to expel somebody on a signatory country's territory if they would then face danger where they were sent back to. But it did not envision a way for people to reach safety.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's like you said that you can't get here, you can't claim asylum unless you step foot on British soil, yeah? But you can if you're Ukrainian.
Yeah, yeah.
Funny
Well,
that.
we created a visa that would allow Ukrainians to reach us, and they would be automatically then entitled to a form of refugee protection. So yeah, no. When the will is there, when we want to protect people and give them safe ways to reach us, we absolutely can. And
Yeah.
we have helped 200,000 Ukrainians that way. Just to put that into some context, it's about 28,000 people who came on a boat this year. So we've helped 7 times as many Ukrainians, and not one of them had to take a boat. So, we could very easily help these people with a safe route to reach us, and we choose not to.
I know it does seem like a bit of a, just it should be our responsibility. Like we should be thinking about this, but even as a very rich country, we don't. And when you look at the countries that are taking loads of refugees, they're not particularly rich usually. You've got countries like Turkey, which takes a lot, but also Papua New Guinea is one of the biggest countries in the world for refugees, and it's not a rich country by any stretch of the imagination. But specifically, what kind of safe routes could be created? Obviously, you can get a visa, the kind of visa application if you are coming from Ukraine. Is that something that could be rolled out to anyone, seeking asylum, fleeing persecution?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about the visa that we made available for Ukrainians is that you can apply for it once you've already done the first escape, right? So, like, you've crossed a border, you've got into a neighboring country, you are no longer under Putin's actual bombs. At that point, you can apply for a visa to travel to the UK. So, that could be a system that would work well for refugees, because one of the key things about being a refugee is you're not safe in your country. So it means that it'd be basically impossible if we created a visa that you could go to, the embassy and apply for in your own country. That's usually going to be impossible for refugees. So it's important to create a system that people can access when they're already on the move. And that's, as you say, it's what we did for Ukrainians.
If
And
only there was some kind of like network of computers around the world that would allow people to send
yeah,
messages, receive messages, documents photographs, ID, fingerprints from anywhere in the world. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? And
It would
also,
be.
if we had some kind of like, I don't know, a British embassy where, you know, people could actually register at the embassy in any country in the world, because we seem to have them in a lot of countries, except for the ones where they're not embassies, they're high commissions, don't you know? But it's like, what's stopping the government? Like, now we've got a Labour government. I could tell what was stopping the Tory government. They're all bastards. But like, what's stopping the Labour government even talking about this kind of stuff? Because Yvette Cooper's just going on about smashing the gangs, and it's like, that's not going to stop it, is it?
It's sheer cowardice. There's nothing else to it. Everybody knows what would fix the problem, and it's politically something that nobody has been making the case for. No political group. We have serious money and serious funding going into think tanks and an entire political party and a second entire political party, frankly, because there's the Tories as well that are pretty much a single issue anti-migration party at the moment. Um, and there's a huge amount of content being produced and of political time being spent on this, on the argument that that refugees are a threat to us, that immigration is a threat to the UK, and there just simply isn't the people on the other side, the people who should be on our side, standing up and making the other argument. I'm we're comparing like Nigel Farage and his millionaire backers and some very small charities whose primary objective is to help some people who are in the most vulnerable and difficult circumstances in this country and who also maybe have a comms person. It's just our argument is completely weighted to the side of just spreading racist lies about migrants being a threat, and Labour has
Yeah.
been too cowardly to stand up to that, and that's why.
But I was trying to think of like the logistical reason for not doing this. Now, at the moment, we've got a system where you can apply for a visa to come here to work, but that costs money. And I'm thinking, okay, it would be a bit crap if we had a system that charged people seeking asylum money to apply to come here. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, I'd rather they have money to spend that on, first of all, application. Don't make it too expensive, but just make it so it doesn't cost Britain anything. Then, where's the harm? And then, secondly, like, they're not giving that money to a person smuggler. Do you know what I mean? Like, those two things to me seems like a no-brainer. It's like, this wouldn't cost us anything because it could
Oh,
pay
it
for
wouldn't cost
itself.
us anything. I mean, the thing to remember with this is, and like one thing is, protecting people is not something that we should do because it benefits us. We should do that
No,
because it's right. But the
yeah,
truth is that it does benefit us. We
that's a
desperately
good point.
need people to do all sorts of different jobs in our economy. Like that's why we go out and actively recruit people to come and work in our health service, work in our farms, all of this stuff. And I certainly don't support an idea that says like you can only get refugee protection or a safe passage here if you are capable of doing that work. But most of them are perfectly capable of working, and we don't allow them to. And at the same time, so we're creating such deadly borders to those people, many of whom could work. And then at the same time, we go out and actively recruit, aggressively recruit for people to come here to work. It doesn't make any sense. There is no
Yeah.
reason why that cannot be matched together, and why the people who need to move are not the priority for, our pool that we need to bring in for migration.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's infuriating because, like you say, we need these people. Now, when I was traveling around the world, I took a boat from Sudan, from Wadi Halfa, up to Aswan in Egypt, and then a couple of weeks later, I took another ship, a ferry boat from the north of Egypt over to Turkey, over to Iskenderun in Turkey. And both of those journeys, I was one of the very few tourists on board. A lot of people were actually Syrian refugees. This was back in 2012, and they were families, and they were spending 6 months in each country that they were allowed to go to on their Syrian passports, and then moving on to the next country. And we've got this concept in the West that refugees are all, goat herders in rags, and they're not. These people were dentists and accountants and school teachers and architects, and people with a job who've had to give up everything and then leave their homes. And I do think that there is a lack of compassion, just a basic lack of compassion across the board in the UK, and I blame this on the media, which we'll come on to in a moment. But this idea that these people are just sitting there, having a nice life somewhere, and they're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to the UK, and I'm going to live in a hostel for 2 years while I wait for my asylum claim to come through, and I won't be able to work in all that time, and I'll only have the clothes that I can carry with me. Why would anyone do that to themselves unless they were genuinely worried about them and their families, their children's lives? And that is a message that I really don't think gets out enough, and it is infuriating. And you're one of the few people that I regularly see on television actually telling it like it is. And when people say, why can't they just stay in France? You're sitting there going, well, actually, that's not on. Why should France take more refugees than we do? In fact, they do. You've said this many times. They take more refugees than we do. But why should we not take any? So what I wanted to ask was, looking at how other countries deal with refugees, and are there any countries that do it very well, or is it all a bit of a? Is it all a bit of a,
Well, I don't want to be too
situation?
much of a downer. There are some examples where definitely some parts of different systems are better than others. Like, so if you look at Europe, across Europe, there are some parts of the systems that are good in different countries and other parts of those same systems that are bad. But there are some examples of countries where it's worked really well. I'm not actually an expert on South America, but they generally have, oh man, sorry, you might be interested in this. I've just got a notification that Liverpool have equalised with Arsenal. Oh no.
I support Everton, so I don't care.
Oh,
Whatever
okay.
happens.
So you're with me and you want Arsenal to win. That's good.
No. I don't. I honestly don't care.
No, you
I've
do,
got to
you
the
do.
point in my
For
life.
this conversation, you do.
Are you an Arsenal fan?
A
You'll get on with
huge
our Wayne. Wayne on our politics Friday night social. He's a big Arsenal fan, I think.
Oh,
But we
God.
wind him up and say he likes West Ham. What is this? Is this a Champions League match or something? Or
No,
is it
no,
just
this is
normal
Premier
league?
League. This is Premier
Oh,
League. This is a big one. We got to win this. Sorry, I got
anyway.
distracted by that. I apologize.
Anyway,
No, no, no.
this
But
is
I mean,
live, by the
South
way.
America has some good examples, and also there was some. This is quite a depressing, but I think a really, really like telling um thing to know, which is that basically across the African Union, they
Yeah,
have an ambition, in theory, to create freedom of movement for African citizens.
yeah,
And what happened was ECOWAS, which is part of the African Union, is the economic community of West African states. That's ECOWAS, and that's like basically it's a bunch of West African states, as you'd imagine. And they had moved quite far towards free movement of citizens. And what that meant was that, in a region like that where there are forced displacement issues, what people had, and this was several years ago, but people had the right to cross a border, and then they didn't lose their rights when they crossed the border. So like with the EU,
yeah.
when you have free movement, the great thing is you go to France and you haven't lost any of your rights. You can participate in the workforce. You can't be discriminated against. You can live with your family, all of these things. So they had that. And that meant that refugees who were escaping danger within ECOWAS countries were able to cross a border and not live in a refugee camp for generations, which often happens, being kept outside of society and unable to work. These people were automatically able to maintain their rights when they reach safety. And that was amazing. But unfortunately, Europe had other ideas. And that's Europe. I say Europe because it was the EU and the UK, both when we were in it and since. We pay and incentivize African countries to build up borders between them so that, because, the theory behind it is that everybody could be coming here. So we pay for border patrols and detention centers and removals from African countries between themselves. And because we have so much more economic power, we have actually basically massively destroyed the movement towards free movement for African citizens. And we have massively impacted the rights of refugees escaping from different countries where they could cross a border safely and just be integrated and not lose their rights. And we have actually built up borders
Jesus.
around the world.
I didn't know that. That's disgraceful. When I travelled around West Africa, I met with some people who were leaving wherever they were, for various reasons. But the idea of going across to Europe meant for sub-Saharan Africans crossing the Sahara, which is a bit of an impenetrable, terrain, and then crossing the Mediterranean. That's even before you start thinking about going anywhere else. And one of the things that I was critical, and I still am critical of the EU about, even though I, ardent Remainer, now a rejoiner, I guess, is their immigration policy, refugee policy. There should be, I feel like there should be a EU-wide migration and asylum policy in which if people are coming from other places or want to come to the EU, they can apply without having to get on a boat and go across the Mediterranean, without having to get on a boat and go across the Channel in the UK's circumstances. And refugees are allocated to different countries depending on whether they've got family there, friends, what language they speak, the colonial legacy of a lot of countries in Africa, for instance, and also, you were saying earlier about like how we need people to come and work. So, if someone is a dentist and there's a country that needs dentists, like I know this one, they can come over and
And
start
that
working
again,
right away.
really key that that's what happened with Ukraine, because we were
Yes.
really like that's the biggest challenge that we face. I think it's enough of a challenge when you think about seriously changing our immigration system here in the UK, but the bigger challenge is that it has to be done regionally. And that's what, like, the reason why we could offer a totally unlimited scheme for Ukrainians to come here and that we would provide them with immediate housing and integration support and so on was because everybody in Europe did that, and no one country then struggled. And everybody, Ukrainians obviously first and foremost, but
Yeah.
like every country in Europe that has taken in Ukrainians will benefit from that as well. Um, and it absolutely has to be done together because we are a big continent with a lot of people, but we're getting older. We need more people, but these numbers spread across a country, a continent, are absolutely like, I mean, they're much more than manageable. They don't even make up as much immigration as we need.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll just talk a little bit about the sort of the attitude towards refugees over the last sort of 30 years. And I don't ever remember it being this xenophobic, but, I was young, I don't know, maybe I just missed it. But like the way that the press have been pushing everything, it's the fault of people coming here, and whether that's, tied in with our membership of the EU, or whether that's asylum seekers. And now it's, anyone from anywhere who's coming here. And it seems that this is they're doing this on purpose. I look at the fact that there was no one coming over on small boats in 2016 or 2017. There was no one coming over because we were part of the Dublin Agreement. If people could be, sent back to France, I don't, that wasn't perfect, but it meant people weren't getting on boats, or if they were, it was very, very few. It wasn't tens of thousands of people taking that dangerous journey. And I think that both political parties, if they were serious about doing something about this and stopping the gangs making the money and stopping people taking this dangerous journey, they'll do exactly what you said and offer safe routes. And do you just think that this is something that we're, the politicians have made a really disgusting calculation and thought we need something to distract people and say, no, the problems in your life aren't caused by the fact that we've not been funding anything. We've not been funding the NHS. We've not been funding education. That all the problems in your life are caused by people coming from other countries and using the NHS, taking all the spaces in the good schools. And do you think that there's a political calculation in that? And if so, I mean, does that run out at Labour, or do you think Labour's included in that?
I think it is a political calculation on in two different ways. Like on the one hand, just this would be politically difficult to achieve. And like I was saying before, the groundwork is just so against it in terms of like political attitudes and what is considered like an acceptable thing to propose that we do in this country, right? So it would be difficult, it would be a huge headache for whichever politician was brave enough to do it. But also, yeah, exactly as you say, I think there's a political gain and there's a psychological gain and there's a financial gain for certain people as well, right? So I think there's a psychological element, which is there are real existential threats facing us. Climate change, and our demographic problem across Europe, our aging populations. These are real existential threats to, our way of life, our welfare states, and our futures. Psychologically, I think people need to put something a lot more manageable in the way of that. So I think that's part of what's playing into it. It's much easier to see a person as a threat that you can understand and hate that. You can't address climate change in the same way. So there's that. And I think also, there are political careers, hundreds and hundreds of political careers across the whole of Europe and the UK that have been built off the back of demonizing migrants. So obviously there is an interest in maintaining that enemy as like a basically the purpose. Why does Nigel Farage have a career? He wouldn't have one if it wasn't for hatred of immigration. And this is an embedded system where there are huge financial benefits for certain groups. So it is incredibly lucrative for private companies to sell drone equipment and surveillance equipment and infrared heat technology cameras. And these contracts will go on expanding forever for how we patrol the borders. And they will never seal the borders. They will never completely stop things from happening. It doesn't matter how many drones and how many infrared cameras we have, how many rolls of barbed wire we wheel out. There will always be another contract for those companies to sell that. So and that's just one, there's the companies that run the detention centers, there's the companies that run the flights, there's the fact that this entire discourse also allows people basically to cut the rights of migrants who are here also, right? So we justify on the basis that we think too many people are coming here, cutting the rights of people who are here, which means that they are unable to complain in the workplace when they are being underpaid and exploited, which again has financial benefits for some people. So it doesn't just happen like when something isn't working, and quite obviously our immigration system is not working, right? But we
Yeah.
keep doing the same thing, and we have been doing the same thing for decades, and we continue to do the same things step by step, more and more extreme, sure, but the same thing. And you've got to ask yourself, well, after a while, this system is working for someone, or we would change it. So it
Yeah.
is work. There are people who benefit from this, and they're getting something out of it. And I think that's a really important part of the story to tell, because otherwise it just sort of feels like it's a sort of natural, but it's not at all natural. And if it was done differently, then the people who benefit would be different people. In fact, they might be us.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Again, I didn't really think about that point you just made about these surveillance companies and people who make, I don't know, night vision cameras making loads of money out of this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's the biggest growth area in defense companies, right? Like,
Defense, they've got to find
obviously,
some. There's not enough wars going on, so they
yeah.
need
No,
something
no,
new
sure.
to
Obviously, they
spend.
also have an interest in maintaining the wars and selling the arms to them, and
Yeah.
then those people, that creates conflict and
Well,
people move, and the
that's
biggest
another
area of
thing.
growth is that spend.
There's
On the
part of
border.
this where you've got something like in Russia, you've got the Wagner Group, which has gone into at least 24 countries in Africa and destabilized them. They've gone in either militarily, or they've messed around with the politics, or they've started insurgencies, and they are creating refugees seemingly on purpose by destabilizing these countries in order to drive them into Europe, because they know that one of the big driving factors in the rise of right-wing populism in Europe and around the world is saying, look at these people coming over here from other countries, aren't they terrible? They're taking all these nice things away from you. And what I wanted to ask is, because you often talk to these people who trot out these lines about, if they don't have any money, how can they afford to pay a people smuggler? If they should be in France, why are they coming over here? Why are they taking our jobs? Blah blah blah. Not our jobs, sorry, all our spaces in the schools, whatever. What do they say when you point this out to them? Say, for instance, about the thing of that there's nothing in the UN Convention of Human Rights or the Refugee Convention about having to stay in the first safe country you get to. And in fact, if people did that, all refugees would be, all the ones from the Middle East would probably be in Turkey, and all of the people coming over from sub-Saharan Africa would all be in Tunisia, I guess, because that's pretty safe. Like, what do they say to you? What's their response to that? Do they take it on, or do they just
Well,
move off to the next talking point?
a lot of the time, it's just you can always there's always the next one. So you can a lot of the discussion that we have about this issue and so many others actually, it's just totally bad faith conversations. The goalpost will always shift. It will always shift. It will always shift. So and I think that with the fact that like this is a legal right that people have to seek asylum, I think that's important to people who already support them. I don't think honestly that if it was like okay wait say we took away that right, say it was actually illegal for them to come seek asylum, would you say they should stop? Like I wouldn't care. What I care about is what's right in as far as I'm concerned. And so I think that the people who are against this, the ones who are sincere, don't care if it's legal. Like if you explain to them and show them how it's legal, they still don't think it should happen because they just that's not the nobody really cares what's legal. We care what's right, what feels right to us, right? So I think people use that and then you sort of move and they can just move on to the next thing. And like if it's not this, then it's that. And if you ask somebody why should France take everyone, they say it's not my problem. And it's just like talking to a toddler, right? Like oh, if I don't want to have to deal with this, then I can just say that the world shouldn't be this way, and that's my argument. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets frustrating. I don't know what to say when someone's just stamping their foot and saying, "But I don't want the world to be this way," and isn't concerned with addressing the world as it is and making that work as best as possible for most people, based on what evidence we have and what compassion and humanity we have. And a lot of people just simply aren't talking on that basis, and that's the problem.
Yeah. And what I mean, this show is called How We Fix Britain. I mean, what are the things that we can do? The people watching this to help refugees and help change the system so that it is more compassionate, but also, I think you made a really good point about like we need people to come over here, right? So this isn't just the moral thing to do, it's also economically beneficial for us to do. There's literally no reason not to do it, except there are people who are horrible and they just want to be horrible, I guess. So what would you say to people watching this, or like what they could do, tonight? What can they get involved in? What groups can they get? Should they write to their MP about it? What do you think they should do?
Yeah, well, I think that there's sort of two sides to what people can do. And if you are someone who is thinking, I would like to do something, bless you, thank you. The game just ended and it was 2-2. I'm very upset by that.
Oh,
Anyway, sorry.
sorry.
Um, Nonetheless, Liverpool fans as well, please do not stop wanting to help. So here's what we need to do. One of the things that's really interesting about the current situation is that you would think we had the worst racism and hostility towards immigration that we've ever had in this country, if you listen to politicians speak. The argument that sort of comes down to, like I say, when all else fails, right? It's like, oh yeah, but this is what the people want. The people vote for less immigration. They voted for Brexit. They vote, right? And actually, you'd imagine that that was true, basically, listening to our media and listening to our politicians. But it's not actually necessarily true. People's views on immigration are very nuanced, but they're more positive now than they have ever been, right? Like the number of people who don't give a damn what color your skin is or what religion you practice or where you were born, right, is far, far higher proportion of people than ever before, even with both an incredibly hostile narrative and, let's be real, not refugees, which is comparable to the levels they were at in the early 2000s, but immigration as a whole is higher and has been unusually high for a couple of years now. And even with that, people's attitudes are, relatively speaking, much more positive. But we don't hear that. That's not the story we hear. The will of the people, the supposed overwhelming consensus in this country,
52%
yeah,
overwhelming
yeah,
majority.
is that we are anti-migrant and that yeah, and that clearly isn't reflected. It's not reflected in the people who are watching this today, and it's just not reflected across the country. It is much more complicated how we feel than that. So we need to do much, much better at making that clear. And I
Yeah.
think people sometimes think, oh, it's not my place, so I don't really have a way to do it. Like, yes, you do. It is your place. It really is, really everybody's place right now to stand up against racism. Like, it really is. If you're, wondering whether, oh, was it my place or not to speak up? Yes, I'm telling you right now, full permission. If you're white, if you're British, yes, it is your place. And so write to your MP, talk to your family and your community. If you're in a church, if you're in a mosque, if you're in a school, like what is your school doing to teach people about these issues? And what do the parents in that school have to say about it? Because if you can get together in any kind of community and then write as a community, either to local media or to your MP, they will take notice. And it is just at that point where I don't know if you saw, sorry, I'm going a slight tangent, but did you see this Hope Not Hate documentary that came out this week?
No, I haven't seen it. We were talking about it on Friday night, and I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But I feel like I should watch it tonight because you're the
It's
second
amazing.
person to
Everybody
say,
should watch it.
yeah.
But one of the things that it made this thing click in my head, this like random bit of it, which is like, there are these far right influencers who are being paid directly as individuals by rich people whose interests lie in maintaining this anti-migrant status quo, to produce content, right? So there is just a massively much more content that is anti-migrant, spreading lies,
Mm,
spreading racism, spreading
yeah.
hate. Then there is content just putting out the other side, right? And this is why, it's why I'm here today. It's why I spend like every spare minute. My job actually isn't doing social media. People would be amazed. I have other things to do, but I do it as much as I possibly can because there is such an imbalance in terms of what is out there. So any opportunity that you have to speak up, you really have to use it and put that in front of your MP and make sure they can't ignore it. And then the other side of what you can do is obviously that there will be a local support group local to you, and they will be helping people in the most sort of basic ways. And honestly, like just spending time in a drop-in center and having a chat with people and sort of getting past the language barrier if there is one. If you don't have any particular skills, I don't have any particular skills, just taking part and showing up. It's really awkward to volunteer the first time, right? It really is. But you get past that and you never ever regret going and doing it. And the difference that it would make if you imagine being a newcomer somewhere and not knowing anybody, like the difference it makes just to be able to have some conversations, to have somewhere to go and some people is really, really huge. And it matters to people a huge amount. And the irony of all of this is that there are so few asylum seekers in the country that like most of us never ever meet one, right? And never ever get to actually have a conversation with them and realize how much they are just human beings. They're just people. They're just people.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a big one because you find often, don't you, that the communities with the fewest immigrants are the ones who are most racist and most xenophobic because they don't know anyone from these places, so they just believe what they read in the news about this terrible thing that's happened. Ivan, thank you very much for the super chat, mate. That's really kind of you. Ivan says, I quickly looked up an old Facebook friend the other day and saw he posted about an asylum seeker murdering a woman, yet he didn't post about an Englishman attempting to murder an asylum seeker. Yeah, that seems very typical, especially on social media these days. Attila is saying, thanks Attila, is saying 52% of those who could be bothered to vote, with the reference to the 52%. The super majority, the biggest electoral majority mandate in history.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and we've got one angry pagan asking about sea level rise and climate change, which is going to fuel mass migration of people. It just is all over the world. You might get people moving out from relatively wealthy countries, in fact, wealthy countries, because their home is no longer there. What are the things that we can do to sort of mitigate that and make it so that people can stay where they live, or climate change in general is sort of the sword of Damocles that's hanging over the whole world at the moment. What policies would be a good way of sort of dealing with that looking forward?
Yeah, this is a big area of discussion because obviously it's happening. There is a lot of things that we could do differently to address climate change. Absolutely not my specialization. Like I, but politically we need to make those changes, and we need to adapt to that world. But one of the biggest adaptations, and this is throughout our history, human beings, the way we have survived throughout history, the best adaptive behavior we have to survive is to move. And our ability to do that is what is going to save many, many people if we carry on in the current trajectory and more places become more and more dangerous to live because of climate. That will be and I'm deliberately framing this like, not like we need to fix climate change because otherwise it's a big threat of migrate. That's not the truth. The truth is that people are already moving because of climate, and they will continue to, because it is the best way for us to survive it when it gets to that point. Obviously, I think that we need to do much more to prevent climate change from getting worse. But we need to start having the conversation about, because what we imagine is that a refugee is one thing, and an economic migrant or a person who comes to work is a totally different thing. And that's why you get this whole thing of like, oh, they're not really asylum seekers, they're economic migrants. Climate comes into that because climate destabilizes. So while climate change is happening, what we see is just more extreme weather events. We see more droughts, we see more famine, we see that play into the likelihood of conflicts. That we see that play into the decisions people make to leave their rural lifestyle and urbanization within countries, right? So what climate does is it's another factor, as well as, because there's really no difference between your economic imperatives and your other safety imperatives, right? Like, you need to eat, you need a house, people need these things. This is what life is. People need them, right? And under capitalism, that's an economic need, right? Um, so to separate out somebody who is purely escaping a bomb from somebody who also needs to put food on the table and needs a job is just stupid. Like, these are one and the same people, and climate is another factor that is going to play into that. So I think that we need to start just broadening out our conversation, recognizing people share multiple reasons why they move, right? And that there are lots and lots of factors that play into the decision to move. And very often, most of the time, people escaping from climate change and climate catastrophe will stay within the borders of their own state, which is the true also when you talk about war, when you talk about just any kind of movement. By far the most common way people move is into towns and cities within their country. And that then plays into, okay, how are people managing there? Are they actually safe there? Do they have a future there? Then they might move, and again, most people who do move across the border stay in the neighboring countries. So making sure that people's right to stay is meaningful means stopping the policies that we do that make those places dangerous. And there's lots of ways in which we do those. Obviously, we sell arms. Obviously, we pollute the world through climate change. Obviously, there's foreign policy questions there as well. But one of the things we do is also around migration. We pay people like the autocratic leader of Tunisia. You brought up Tunisia. We paid him hundreds of millions of euros and pounds to contain migrants. I mean, he is somebody who is not democratically elected, does not have a free press, does not have human rights in his country, and where that is obviously one of the drivers of migration out of Tunisia, right? But we are propping him up and paying him and keeping him in place and empowering him because we want him to prevent people from moving. So we are destabilizing and making Tunisia less safe, right? Which means that fewer people who reach Tunisia, having escaped maybe famine and drought in sub-Saharan Africa, will be able to stay there. And so we create the need for longer and more dangerous journeys because we take away people's right to stay by destabilizing the places where they might have found sanctuary otherwise.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, Britain has an outsized influence on the world, and I think there's a lot of people who would prefer we didn't, but it's just it's a fact. Like, and if we don't help out places around the world that are suffering through from whatever, then we are just generating more likelihood of people trying to come here from those countries and taking these really dangerous routes to get here. So at the moment, it's the worst of all possible worlds. We make it an absolute bitch to get here, and then it's a whole, once people are here, they're not treated very well, especially by the gammon press. But also the fact that so many of these places are coming from places that we've destabilized. Like anyone coming from Iraq or Afghanistan over the last 20 years has come here because we destabilized that area, and we need to, I don't know, own up, take responsibility, grow up, I guess, over all this. But what I want to do now is I just want to move on to talking about refugees and asylum seekers. Once they're here, what can we do better? Because at the moment, we've got this, what I think is a ridiculous system in which they're not allowed to work until they're they're not allowed to work until they're given, I got really high pitched then, until they're granted asylum status. And not even in America do they do this. Like America, where there's a whole thing now about hating anyone from any other country. At least they allow people to work while they are claiming asylum. We don't do that in this country. That makes no, again, moral sense or economic sense. So, well, apart from that, what are some of the things that we could do to make things better for refugees, the life of the refugees, the mental health of the refugees? Like, what can we do to improve their situation in this country once they're here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we should do definitely the right to work. It's an interesting one because people always say, oh, we must be a soft touch because why else would they be wanting to come from Europe? Actually, across the EU, EU law says that after 9 months, you have to have the right to work I mean, 9 months is insanely long, but lots of EU countries allow you to work after 6 months. And that would be, so when people say, oh, we can't give them the right to work because that would make them want to come. They're coming from places where they have the right to work. So there's obviously something else, right? But yes, so the right to work is obvious. The right to work would benefit us, it would benefit them. There's a coalition of organizations called Lift the Ban. If you want to look them up and send their report to your MP, they looked into this. They say, it's not just that this would stop costing us money, that we're supporting people that would be able to support themselves. It would actually be a net gain of £100 million per year, just from the potential taxes, and that it makes so much sense. Let them work. Also, but like the decision making shouldn't take that long. You wouldn't really need to have the right to work if we were making good quality, fair decisions in the system and getting people through the system within a few months. And actually, the average time that you spend waiting for an asylum decision currently in the UK is 2 years. That is insane. That is insane from any perspective. That is an insane way to run a system, right? And what the problem is that what the government is currently talking about is doing a fast track for some people, but they're talking about doing it for exactly the wrong people. So I'll tell you who you could fast track their asylum claims really easily: Syrians, Iranians, Afghans, Eritreans, all the people who have very, very, very high recognition rates as refugees, right? Like most people, almost everybody, like it's just, you could just grant them. So keeping a Syrian or an Afghan or an Eritrean economically inactive in an asylum hotel for 2 years is insane. So you want to do a fast track system, you do it for them. You get them through straight away. You start their process of recovery and integration, right? Where they're talking about doing a fast track is for people coming from countries where not everybody would be necessarily recognized as a refugee, right? So we're talking about countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these kind of countries. That's the opposite of what you need to do, because those are cases where there isn't generalized violence, there isn't a generalized risk to safety, but individual people experience things like honor violence, so-called, right? Like gender-based violence. They experience gang violence, trafficking. They might be gay and be facing persecution because of that. And the state basically may be unable or unwilling to help them and to protect them. And that means they're still a refugee, but it is more difficult for them to explain that. And they will need support and a process that is more involved and more careful and takes more time in order to establish what their needs are. Those are the people we should be spending more time on. But those are the people that the current government is talking about putting into a fast track, because the idea of a fast track is about fast track refusal rather than fast track to help people to start to rebuild their lives here. So they're looking at it totally the wrong way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to specific policies, it does seem bananas to me that the especially with Labour, like they've got 5 years now. They could do what the hell they like, especially if Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick's going to be the leader of the Tories. They're not going to come back anytime soon. They could be going at this and trying to explain to people why actually having people coming from other countries is not just the right thing to do, but also necessary because of our aging population, etc. And there are a lot of vacancies in our job market and things like that. But also like the fact that the way that the Tories set everything up was like the most dangerous and the most expensive and, like you say, the most insane way possibly of doing this. So what specific changes would you like to see in the law or with policy changes to make this, to make this whole process more humane and efficient for the people going through all this?
So I think what the law needs to do is reflect reality, and the reality is that the vast majority of people who come and seek asylum in the UK end up staying here and building their lives here. That's just a fact. And we have had, as you said, 30 years of hostility and policy designed to make that not be true, and it remains true. It is a fact. It's a good thing, in my opinion. But regardless of whether it's a good thing or not, it's a fact. So everything we do in our asylum system to make the system hostile, which is supposed to stop people from coming, newsflash, it didn't. That actually stops people from being able to integrate. So things like putting people into institutional accommodation, whether that's the hotels that we've been using for the last few years, but also these awful barracks, and just really terrible quality, poor quality accommodation.
Yeah.
That is disastrous. You leave people in those places, they're isolated from communities of support. Obviously it impacts their mental health, their safety and well-being could be harmed because it could be inappropriate for them to be sharing accommodation and sharing bedrooms with strangers and so on. So it's just a disastrous system of accommodation. And actually, like, housing is a big problem in general in this country. But there are clear, costed, like detailed plans of how to approach this as the Home Office working with local authorities. And there are the beds available, but this needs to be done as a universal housing thing. So I think it's really important that we don't like separate out, because putting people in hotels, the hotels are disgusting. They're vile places. They're horrific. Nobody should be in those hotels. But also they've created a scenario where you see a homeless person on the street and you see a hotel that is supposedly housing asylum seekers. That is a situation that was designed to put a target on their backs. That process should be changed to a universal housing provision for everybody who is in need of temporary accommodation in order to help them get into more long-term solutions. So asylum accommodation should not be separate from accommodation that meets everybody's needs in our society. So there's that. And like I say, like, people just, there are smart people who work for, research bodies and charities who have done this work and who have like worked out these plans, and the beds are there, like we do not have to have people in hotels at all. So there's that. And then we need to obviously have faster and better quality decisions, and we need to have integration support. Things like, like if you leave somebody on their own for 2 years in a hotel without the right to work, and then you give them their paperwork saying, oh, we've recognized you're a refugee, you are entitled to rebuild your life here now, scoot out of the hotel, good luck to you. Obviously, these people have pretty poor outcomes. They have a lot of homelessness, and it takes them quite a long time to get up to the same level as other migrants in terms of employment and matching the local population as well. So we need to start integration support from day one. People, and they do this in other countries, they do this in Spain. So in Spain, their asylum system, they have not only like Spanish language classes, but also like training and skills support, and a process like explaining to them, how does the Spanish job market work? How does the Spanish social housing system work? How do these processes work, so that when you get to the point where you're out of this asylum accommodation, you are ready to go and you are armed with that those networks, that support, that knowledge, that information, so that you know how to set your life up. And they have partnerships between asylum processing local authorities and local businesses that are struggling to recruit workers. And they have direct partnerships where they provide training and facilitation, and then they have a jobs program to allow people to get quickly into self-sufficiency and providing a service that that country bloody needs. You
Well,
know,
exactly.
like
Yeah.
these are all quite obvious things, but we have designed our asylum system to do the entire opposite. And then,
Yeah.
there's also the big one, which is legal aid. Legal aid in general is has been just decimated by 14 years of Tory rule, but specifically on immigration, it has been ripped apart. Like rates for legal aid, like real terms, have been frozen for since the 90s. Like immigration legal aid is an incredibly like costly thing for lawyers to provide. And the good quality legal advice when you're going through such a complicated system is just if you can get that early and at the start and get that support, then the difference it makes, the likelihood that you will get a good decision that is fair and correct for your case first time, so much higher. The likelihood that you will then not end up going through a much more costly appeals process, being trapped in the system for so much longer. Like it is a massive cost saving. You just have to invest in a justice system that everybody can access in the country. You just have to. It's just a thing you have to do, and we have to have that. Like legal aid needs a massive injection of investment. And again, this has been planned out by like lawyers. They're smart people. They've written reports. They've written it out step by step. This is what this thing needs. This isn't hard. Labour has it in front of them. They have been sent this. Like they know what needs to be done. The question is, do they think they can get away with not doing it?
Well, yeah, I think they think they can get away with not doing it. We've had a couple of super chats come in. First of all, number 3. Thank you very much, Richard. Our entire political system is dysfunctional shit. Fair enough, mate. Yeah, I can't disagree with
You've got
that.
a point.
You got a point. Good point. Well made. And then we've got Ivan Ambrose there as well. Thank you, Ivan. The work restrictions on migrants should be lifted. They are desperate to support themselves and contribute to the economy, which is very true. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was Ukrainian refugees. So, over the last few years, I've been over to Ukraine. I've picked up refugees from the processing centre or the asylum centre on the border with Ukraine and Poland, and brought people back to wherever they were staying. I mean, they might be staying in Germany or Holland, and a few people came over to the UK. And that was all set up where they would go and stay with either their family, who was, living in another country, or with people who offered to put them up in their homes. And this was fine. Like, this was a really great system. And now we've integrated, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it's something like in the region of 200,000 Ukrainians who have come over the last few years. Every Ukrainian I've ever met has said they want to go home as soon as the war is over. The only reason that they're living in the UK is because, obviously, it's dangerous to be in Ukraine at the moment. But as a way of not just having a place for refugees to stay, a program for them so they're not going to be on the streets when they get given their asylum, which is something that should be granted before they get here so they can take safe routes over here. But a program like this would not just alleviate the economic side of things, it would also show that Britain is a lot more generous and kind-hearted than the likes of Nigel Farage and the right-wing media like to pretend. And I think you would be surprised at how many people would open their homes to refugees, just as we've done over the last few years to people coming over from Ukraine. Do you think do you think this is pie in the sky? Do you think I'm just
No, I think
crazy
it
ginger?
makes sense. I think no. I mean, you probably are a crazy ginger,
Yeah,
but
that's true.
no. It makes so much sense. You look at the surveys of the people who open their homes to Ukrainians. It's such an incredibly generous and kind thing to do. But it doesn't surprise me that so many people did it, because I know lots of people in this country, and that's the people I know. They're kind people,
Yeah, they
right?
want to help.
They want to help. They want to do something good, and it feels bloody good. And that's what you see also, because they've been surveyed, and like overwhelmingly they say, yeah, of course I'd do it again. Like, and there are, and maybe somebody who's watching today would, also like to help. There's a charity, there are a few of these, but the one that I know and love very much is called Refugees at Home. Small charity, and what they do is basically that, but like they do it for people who are in the asylum system here, and homeless. So they're not being provided with the usual accommodation from the government for whatever reason. They may be like have been here for a while, they may be newly arrived or whatever, but they carefully match people who have space in their homes. And people are doing that. You know, it's a small charity, but they have like people coming through their door every single day saying, like, I want to help. And, you know, as soon as I get into a place that's a little bit bigger, it's obviously something that I would love to do too. I think it's something that a lot of people want to do and want to have the opportunities to help more. And like I say, one of the ironies of all of this is like, we talk about this so much, but there are so few asylums, like 28,000 people coming across on a boat this year. We're a country of like nearly 70 million people. Just your likelihood of actually being able to help one, like there are limited ways you can, and people want to help far more than they're given the opportunity to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have to finish off soon. But before we do, we're obviously bringing a few things that we've talked about over the last hour together. But what would be your sort of ideal system? What if Zoe was in charge tomorrow of the asylum seeker, the immigration system in this country? What changes would you make on day one? What would be your long-term vision after that?
Oh, on day one, I would have a moratorium on deportations and I would have everybody come out of the detention centers because detention is a cruel, unnecessary, and harmful and costly torture that we put people through. Um,
Mm.
Everybody who is within the asylum system or the immigration system in general, like detention, to be clear, it's not prison in the sense that it is like prison. People experience it like prison, but it's not prison in the sense that you haven't been charged with a crime, you haven't been found guilty, you're not being put away because of any sort of element of like safety to our society. It is administrative detention. That's the long word. The purpose of detention is to lock someone up for the purpose of removing them from the country. And that is not necessary. And it harms people immensely. So if there's a huge amount of things I would change, but on day one, the one thing, like most things need to be like done bit by bit. But that is something that just close them down today, every single one of those people who is in detention can and should be accommodated within our communities, just like anybody else. Regardless of what the outcome of their claim is going to be, we should not be treating people with cruelty. So that would be my number one move. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, again, this government's going in the opposite direction, reopening old detention centers in order to lock up more people in these ways. And it's just the wrong way to approach this. These are human beings,
Yeah.
just like you and me. They do not need to be locked up or kept away.
And the thing is, when people go, well, where do you find the money for this? It's like, this would be cheaper than putting
So much
people into
cheaper. Oh
hotels.
my
It's
God, it's
way
incredibly
cheaper.
expensive
We
to run
would
detention centers.
save so much money.
Yeah, and
Again,
again,
it's the
they're
moral
run by
decision,
private.
the right moral decision, but also it's the right economic decision
Yeah,
if you want to
no, I
play
know. It's one of
hardball.
these things where like people like sometimes I do make a moral case because I think that the moral case is what
Yeah,
we're actually motivated, right?
yeah.
Like we
That
actually genuinely
motivates
want people
us. I'm trying to motivate the Tories. I'm
yeah,
trying to motivate the
but
gammon to
it
go,
is
hang
one of
on,
these
why
cases
are we
where like your
wasting all
head
this
and
money?
your heart are aligned. Your head and your heart are aligned. Like
Yeah,
this is what makes sense. This is what would work. We would benefit hugely economically from being less cruel. The private companies that run detention centers, like I won't cry a tear for their like bottom line. That money, if it was invested, like I say, into universal, good quality temporary accommodation that is available for everybody, including the people who are in the asylum system, that would benefit us massively if it wasn't for profit. Like this is somewhere where your head and your heart can be totally aligned. And unfortunately, we're doing the dumb, cruel thing. And I don't get it.
yeah. What can we do to, affect the newspapers in any way, shape, or form? I know no one under the age of 50 really reads a newspaper anymore, but like they're so like angry all the time. Trying to get people angry all the time about. I say asylum seekers, but it's just people from other countries, isn't it? Let's
Yeah.
be honest. Is there stuff that we can push Labour to do that they might not realise is actually going to help us sort of long term for what we would like to see the future of Britain look like, especially when it comes to sort of press reform or
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
not
Leveson too. I mean,
not
there's a
allowing three people to own three-quarters of the media in this country. Do you know what I mean?
it is shocking. I mean, I really think that like one of the things that would benefit us the most would be like major, major reform of how we regulate the media. And like as you say, like these like a handful, literally a handful of not even mainly British, um, billionaire dude bros own our press. It's that simple, right? Like
Mm.
in the last like 4 years, I don't know about you, I have felt like poorer than I did before. Like everything's more expensive. Everybody's struggling in this country. Not those guys. Oh no. You know, Paul Marshall, he's the majority share owner of GB News. He just bought Casual, The Spectator, for 100
Yes.
million. And
Yeah.
he's number one in the running, as far as I know, to buy the Tory graph, the Telegraph. It is the Tory
Yeah.
graph,
It
whatever.
is
It
the Tory
will be
graph.
the
Yeah.
far right graph
This is
after
this
this.
is the father of the banjo player from Mumford and Sons.
It's,
Yeah.
wow. Wow. Well, he's almost doubled his fortune in the last 4 years while we've all
Yeah.
been
Well,
struggling. And
I
that's the
mean,
hate pedal.
so many of these billionaires have, haven't they? With
Yeah.
COVID, that they've made an absolute fortune, and the rest of us have just got poorer. Which doesn't make much economic long term sense, because if we haven't got money to spend, we're not going to buy their shit because we can't afford Netflix and we can't afford nice things. If we're
Yeah.
spending all of our money on food, we're not going to be spending much money buying the Spectator, for instance. But I don't think they buy those papers to make money. I think they buy them just to, you know,
No. And I think that's the
influence
thing. You
people.
can
They're
always
mind worms.
headline compare. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good,
Yeah.
like, because the Times, like, basically what happens on the Sun is what dictates is then spoken about on ITV. I've seen this. Sun headline goes to ITV the next morning. That will be their little discussion program. And but like the Times will then influence BBC, right? So like if you read the Times headline and then find the same story written up in the Guardian or the BBC or whatever, just compare the headlines. Just compare them. I'm not telling you which one's right. None of them are probably right, but a lot of them are
No.
far right. And you can tell. And I find it a really helpful exercise when I know a story like about migration is going to come out today. Like look at a few different headlines and see, and then just to consistently remind yourself. Um, and then yeah, obviously invest in your money if you're buying it in the ones that cover these stories humanely and do really good work. Like I don't know if you guys know Byline Times. Like I think Byline
Yeah.
Times
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
independent
We-
like journalism that's really like it's really valuable. Like it's
Yeah.
invaluable. And
Yeah.
like if you're going to spend money on media, then I guess yeah, just try to
They've
support
got a
the ones that
print
are good.
mag now. They've got a print magazine.
That's great.
And it's available in all I've seen it around in like in news agents and stuff. It's a monthly magazine, and it's really really good. It's got some really good articles in there.
Yeah,
Um,
good quality stuff.
and yeah, I mean, we kind of diss the Guardian a bit on this channel now and again, but generally speaking, they'll be on the side of righteousness when it comes to things like migration, in a way that the Mail, the Express, and the Tory graph, as you mentioned, are just. I mean, the vitriol,
It's
the
mad.
hatred, the demonization of people
Actually, a
who are just trying
story
to get on the line.
just on this because I
Yeah.
find it like uplifting. Like sometimes you can do some small thing. There was a story being reported on like yesterday, a day before, that was in being reported on BBC News website, and it's basically it was a neo-Nazi guy with a Hitler tattoo and swastika memorabilia, and like not someone I'm calling a neo-Nazi, someone who is definitely a neo-Nazi who had gone to a hotel where he thought asylum seekers were being housed, and he stabbed a black dude who turned out not to be an asylum seeker, but anyway, he thought he was, and
Mm.
tried to kill him, and he was found guilty of attempted murder. And the BBC headline was um, "Man stabbed in small boats protest."
What?
And yeah, no, I know because terrorist murder is now just protest and but like BBC has a form. It's quite straightforward. You've put in your complaint, you say this is what are you doing, and they changed that within like 5 hours. They changed the headline to say white
That's what people complaining
supremacists.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so like with BBC, always put in that complaint
Yeah.
every single time. Just do it. It takes a couple of minutes, and like it can be very frustrating when it doesn't work, but sometimes it does.
Yeah, brilliant. We've just got a super chat come in from Puninator. Thank you very much for that. Just got in. Got to rewatch this first, but want to ask, what's the best way to show peeps who are not into politics but buy the right wing propaganda the truth when it comes to immigration? And we'll make that the last question because we've really got to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean that's tough. I like I don't not just because it's me. There's loads of people like me, like but like the charities and so on. The people who are humanizing and putting out other content, like put my videos in front of them maybe, but also I think just fundamentally just try to ask them to just think, like, calm down a bit, right? Like, don't just rage at this headline or that headline, and just start from the place that we recognize that these are just human beings. They're just people like you and me. Now then, do we need to manage it well? Are there problems? Are some of them nasty? Sure, all things that we need to discuss, but ask them maybe to just stop. And before we start on this, let's recognize that they're just human beings. And as long as we're holding that in our head, I think even a conversation with somebody who is very hostile, like, it's got to be better, right? I would like to believe it's got to start from a better place. If you've taken the time to be like, just human beings, flesh and blood, ordinary person, right? I think that's just where we have to start at the moment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We've got, I was just about to wrap up, but we've got another super chat from Ivan. The trouble is, print newspapers are not read so much now, but they are everywhere else, online, social media. P.S. The Telegraph, Torygraph has always been awful, but now it's crazier than ever. I can't agree more, Ivan.
And the Times has got a lot worse as well.
Oh, it's Murdoch rag, isn't it? Yeah, we're not fans of Murdoch in this city. Also, Cozy put in a mention before saying, can you please mention that all BRPs, which stands for Biometric Resident Permits, expire at the end of the year, and people must set up their e-visa. Otherwise, they will not be able to prove their right to work, rent, bank, pension, NHS, etc. from January onwards. That's really important. If you know anyone,
really important, and it's something we didn't get to touch on today, but like, they are storing up.
Yeah.
Guaranteed another Windrush with this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is going to be
chaotic move. But yeah, anybody who's a migrant here, any kind of migrant whatsoever, or if you know anyone who is, just check that they are aware, because everybody has to switch over to this digital system by the end of the year.
There you go. There's some homework for you watching this. Okay, so Zoe, thank you so much for coming on the show, and talking to me and everyone else about, how we fix Britain, because these things, and they need a platform. And I've got to say thank you to you just for being one of the main people on TV, again, banging the drum, saying the obvious truths about the situation, because I feel like in some ways we're drowning in propaganda, we're drowning in Tory lies and right-wing, newspaper lies about immigration and asylum. And I just want to say thank you for setting so many people right on this. And it would be nice on a few of these shows if they ever let you finish what you were saying, but I hope we've let you do that today.
It's great to have the opportunity to actually talk these ideas through, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And I also really appreciate that every time that I do get to go on TV and even just say for like 10 seconds, try to say something human, I know that I'm speaking for a lot of decent people up and down the country. And I'm really glad to have that privilege, but to know that I'm speaking for others is really important. So thanks.
Brilliant. And you're at Zoe Gardner on Twitter.
Everything, literally. If you can think of it, I'm on it.
TikTok. Zoe, you does a video. You do like one a day, don't you?
I did do one a day. I now do a few a week. One a day was slightly killing me.
It's exhausting, isn't it? I tried to do that for a bit, and I just, sorry to the people who are liking my TikTok content. It is absolutely exhausting. But yeah, if you look at Zoe Gardner, and I'll put that into the description actually, and you can follow her on social media, and that'll be great. I'll be back in the morning at 9:30 with Morning Brew. So until then, I'll say thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Zoe. Thanks to all the chat. Thanks for the super chats. And until next time, I'll say hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.
Bye. Thank you so much.